Love, betrayal, and desperation converge in a swirl of scandalous secrets and heartbreaking revelations. Meet Elena Patterson, a kind-hearted woman in the final stages of pregnancy, and Dominic Patterson, her charismatic millionaire husband. They appear to live a fairy tale life in the heart of Manhattan until a fateful event turns their world upside down. When Elena is forced to give birth prematurely, Dominic's attention is inexplicably fixed elsewhere on his mysterious mistress, Sophia Laurent, who faints at the hospital at the same critical moment. What unfolds next is a tale of lies, shattered vows, and a fight for redemption that nobody could have predicted. Elena Patterson gently placed her hand over her swollen belly as she gazed out the expansive floor-to-ceiling window of the Patterson penthouse. The shimmering skyline of New York stretched before her, a testament to Dominic Patterson's staggering success in the world of luxury real estate. Though she'd lived in this opulent residence for nearly a year, she never grew tired of watching the city lights twinkle like a promise that all dreams, no matter how grand, were possible. She had met Dominic 2 years ago at a charity gala hosted by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Dressed in a sleek tuxedo, Dominic had been the picture of confidence. His perfectly styled dark hair and deep-set hazel eyes had drawn Elena in immediately. Their connection was instant, like fate had bound them together. Within a whirlwind year, they were married in an extravagant ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral, officiated by close friend Reverend Pierce Thompson, a well-known figure in Manhattan's high society. Elena's life had changed drastically from the moment she said "I do." She left her position as an elementary school teacher in Queens, where she'd taught for nearly a decade, to focus on building a family with Dominic. It was the life she had always dreamed of: a loving husband, a secure future, and, very soon, a child to call their own. At 8 months pregnant, she floated between excitement and nervousness, sometimes unable to believe how quickly her world had transformed. Dominic, however, was a man of many obligations. His business dealings spanned global markets, requiring him to travel frequently to cities like London, Dubai, and Hong Kong. His father, the late Harrison Patterson, had established Patterson and Company with the dream of dominating the luxury real estate market. Dominic, as the only child, had inherited not just wealth and connections, but also immense pressure to continue expanding his father's empire. In the penthouse's lavish living room, Elena sank into a plush velvet sofa, glancing at the baby book on the marble coffee table. Every page was filled with her notes, potential baby names, nursery themes, pediatricians recommended by her friend Dr. Linda Cornell at Mount Sinai Hospital. She flipped open to a page showing a sonogram of her unborn baby boy. The sight filled her with warmth, reassuring her that in a few short weeks she'd be a mother. Shortly after, she heard the front door open. Dominic strolled in, wearing a tailored navy suit and exuding the powerful confidence that had first attracted her. He greeted her with a polite peck on the forehead. Though affectionate in gesture, Elena sensed a slight distance in his eyes, something she had noticed over the last few months. He seemed preoccupied, almost burdened by a secret that weighed him down. She wanted to ask if everything was all right, but she also knew how guarded Dominic could be. Still, Elena decided not to press him too hard that evening. With the baby's due date fast approaching, she hoped to keep the household calm and supportive. Yet an unshakable sense of unease hung in the air, hinting that the days of peace in the Patterson home might soon come to an abrupt end. The next morning, Elena awakened to the familiar sounds of Dominic pacing in his office. The muffled drone of his urgent phone calls drifted down the hall. Carefully, she rose from the bed and tiptoed to the office door, not to eavesdrop, but simply to see if he was all right. Through the slight crack in the door, she glimpsed him pinching the bridge of his nose in frustration. "Look, "We'll finalize the deal once we get the clearance from Judge Clara Thompson," he said in a low, controlled tone. "I need that property in Westchester. No delays." He slammed the phone down, his composure wavering. Elena's heart sank. Dominic had been under tremendous pressure with a massive development project in the Westchester area. Though it was crucial to his company's growth strategy, Elena worried he was pushing himself too hard. She gently knocked on the doorframe, prompting him to turn. His gaze softened upon seeing her. "Sorry," Dominic murmured, forcing a small smile. "I didn't mean to wake you. The Westchester deal is proving more complicated than I expected." She stepped into the office and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You know you can always talk to me," she offered. "I'm here for you, Dominic. Stress isn't good for either of us, especially with the baby almost here." He nodded but didn't offer further explanation. Instead, he grabbed his briefcase and gave her a quick kiss. "I have to head out. There's a lunch meeting with the mayor's office about new zoning laws," he said. "I'll try to be home early tonight." As Elena watched him go, her mind drifted back to the late-night phone calls she had caught him taking in the past few weeks, calls that ended abruptly whenever she entered the room. She wanted to trust him implicitly. After all, they had built their marriage on the bedrock of love and respect. Yet the seeds of doubt had quietly started to germinate. Had she heard a woman's voice on the other end sometimes? Was he merely discussing business, or was something else at play? She spent the rest of the morning tending to the finishing touches in the nursery. Powder blue walls, whimsical clouds painted across the ceiling, and a vintage crib hand selected from a boutique in Soho. It was perfect, a haven of innocence and new beginnings. However, as she folded baby clothes and organized the changing table, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that her dream life was on the precipice of unraveling. That afternoon, she met her friend and old colleague from the school, Anita Lopez, for lunch at a small cafe on Lexington Avenue. Over plates of fresh salads and iced tea, Elena couldn't help confiding some of her worries. Anita listened intently, her eyes full of concern. "Marriage takes work," Anita remarked, gently laying a hand on Elena's. "But if something really feels wrong, you should talk to him directly. Secrets can poison a relationship." Elena nodded, her heart heavy with unspoken fears. She resolved to have an honest conversation with Dominic soon. Yet a subtle voice inside her warned that clarity might come at a painful price. Late that evening, Elena was curled up in bed with a pregnancy book when the doorbell rang. It was close to 9 p.m., an odd hour for visitors. She struggled to rise, her protruding belly making it difficult to move quickly. Eventually, she made her way to the door, peering through the peephole. She recognized the woman standing there, Harriet Patterson, Dominic's mother. Harriet was well known in Manhattan's elite circles, a regal figure who carried herself with an air of refinement. Dressed in a cream-colored coat that perfectly matched her pearl necklace, she could have been mistaken for a queen arriving at court. "Harriet," Elena greeted, opening the door. "Is everything okay?" Harriet stepped inside with purposeful grace. She glanced around the penthouse, her gaze critical yet discreet. Though Harriet had never been overtly hostile, Elena always sensed that her mother-in-law had reservations about her background. Elena came from a modest upbringing, and Harriet had made it clear that she envisioned a more prestigious match for her only son. "Elena, dear," Harriet began, her voice smooth and measured. "I thought I'd drop by unannounced to check on you and the baby, of course." Elena guided Harriet to the living room, offering her a seat. Dominic had yet to return home. Harriet's sudden arrival piqued Elena's curiosity. The older woman never visited without calling first, and she was never one to casually drop by. "Dominic should be home soon," Elena mentioned, settling into an armchair. "He's been working late a lot these days." Harriet pursed her lips. "Yes, I know. He's quite tied up with that Westchester property, among other things." She paused, her eyes scanning Elena's face. "You look tired. Is everything all right with the pregnancy?" Elena forced a smile. "Just the usual fatigue. The doctor says I should be getting plenty of rest, but it's hard to sleep with so much on my mind. I can't wait for the baby to arrive and everything to settle." Harriet leaned forward. "That's partly why I'm here, Elena. I know you've noticed. Dominic's behavior has changed. He's my son, and I understand him better than anyone. Lately he's, how shall I put this? Distracted. Preoccupied with matters he's not sharing openly." Elena's heart quickened. She wondered how much Harriet actually knew. "Yes, I've noticed. He seems distant." Harriet exhaled slowly. "Dominic is carrying the weight of the family legacy on his shoulders. He feels enormous pressure to uphold his father's reputation. I suspect he's making choices that might compromise his personal life." "Choices?" Elena repeated, voice tinged with nervousness. She wanted to ask directly, "Is he seeing someone else?" But the words wouldn't leave her lips. Harriet stood up, her posture stiff and authoritative. "I came here to assure you that, regardless of what happens, my grandchild will always have the support of the Patterson family. If Dominic makes mistakes, it doesn't mean you or the baby will ever be cast aside. You must remember that." The conversation left Elena unsettled. Harriet's cryptic statements felt like a half-revealed truth. Before she could press for more, Harriet dismissed herself, claiming she had an early flight to Boston. With a gentle kiss on Elena's cheek, she departed, leaving Elena alone with an even heavier sense of foreboding. The following week passed in a haze for Elena, who found herself increasingly isolated in the penthouse. Dominic was often gone before she awoke, returning late at night and heading straight into his office or collapsing in the guest bedroom. He claimed he didn't want to disturb her sleep, but Elena suspected there was more to it than simple courtesy. One chilly afternoon, she visited Dr. Linda Cornell for a routine check up at Mount Sinai Hospital. Dr. Cornell had been a close friend since their college days at Fordham University. After the ultrasound and some standard tests, Dr. Cornell ushered Elena into her office for a private talk. "You need to be mindful of your stress levels," Dr. Cornell advised gently. "At 8 months, you're nearing the final stretch, and stress can contribute to premature labor. If there's anything going on, marital tension, for example, try to address it or find healthy ways to cope." Elena nodded. She was touched by Dr. Cornell's concern. Over herbal tea in the hospital's small cafe, Elena confessed her worries about Dominic's recent secrecy. She expressed her fear that he might be having an affair. Dr. Cornell listened attentively, offering both emotional support and professional advice. "Take care of yourself first," Dr. Cornell said firmly. "No matter what Dominic is doing, you and the baby come first. If you suspect something, maybe you should confront him." With that in mind, Elena returned to the penthouse, determined to have an honest conversation. Dominic arrived just after midnight, his shirt collar undone and his hair disheveled. When she approached him in the foyer, he seemed taken aback. "I need to talk to you," Elena said, trying to keep her voice from trembling. He sighed. "Can it wait till morning? I'm exhausted." She stood her ground. "No, it can't. I'm pregnant, Dominic, and I feel like I'm alone in this marriage. You come home late, you barely speak to me, and I can't help but suspect." She paused, struggling to gather courage. "I suspect there might be someone else." A flash of panic crossed Dominic's eyes. He opened his mouth as if to deny it, but hesitated. "Elena," he began slowly, "it's not what you think. There's a lot going on with the business. I don't want you to worry. Trust me. Trust him." Elena wanted to, but his evasive reply only fueled her fears. She tried to search his gaze for any glimmer of honesty, but he offered no further explanation. In that moment, an invisible gulf expanded between them, as if they were standing on opposite shores of a widening river. Emotions raging, Elena retreated to the master bedroom. As she closed the door, tears welled up in her eyes. She felt her baby kick almost as if he sensed her turmoil. She placed a hand on her belly, whispering, "It's going to be okay." But deep down, she wasn't sure if she believed it. Dominic, meanwhile, stood alone in the hallway, hands clenched at his sides. He gazed at the closed door, burdened by secrets he couldn't yet unveil. Elena's suspicions solidified into grim certainty one crisp winter evening. She was tidying up the living room when Dominic's phone buzzed on the coffee table. Curious and a bit wary, she glanced at the screen. It wasn't locked. A single message glowed with a name she'd never seen, Sophia Laurent. "Miss you." Tonight was incredible. Her heart thudded. Blood rushed to her ears, and her vision blurred momentarily. Every muscle in her body tensed as she tried to process what she had just seen. Despite her better judgment, she scrolled further, uncovering a string of texts, plans for clandestine dinners, affectionate notes, references to private moments that were clearly intimate. Betrayal screamed at her from every digital word. When Dominic stepped out of his office, he found Elena clutching his phone, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Who is Sophia Laurent?" she demanded in a shaky voice. His face went pale. He tried to grab the phone, but Elena pulled away. "Elena, let me explain." "Explain what?" she spat, the anger evident in her trembling tone. "How you've been lying to me for months. How you've been sneaking around while I'm carrying your child." Dominic exhaled, shoulders slumping in guilt. "I never wanted to hurt you. She's a consultant. We met through a mutual contact at a charity event. It started out professionally, but then things got complicated." Elena's rage flared. "Complicated? You made it complicated. You married me. You promised me a life together, a family." And now she couldn't finish her sentence. A sudden wave of dizziness gripped her, forcing her to steady herself against the back of a chair. Dominic reached out, concern replacing his defensiveness for a moment. "Elena, please," he pleaded. "Sit down. You need to take care of yourself." Elena recoiled from his touch. "Don't you dare act concerned about me now. You betrayed me in the worst way possible." He tried to speak, but she stormed into the bedroom and slammed the door, leaving him alone in the echoing silence of the penthouse. Inside the bedroom, she collapsed onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. The baby kicked again, as if sensing her agony. She pressed her hands against her belly, whispering through tears, "I'm so sorry, baby. We'll be fine, I promise." Over the next few days, Dominic attempted multiple times to make amends, sending flowers to the bedroom, leaving apologetic notes under the door, and even enlisting Harriet to intervene. But Elena refused to see him. The revelation of Sophia Laurent had shattered her faith in their marriage. Deep in the darkness of her hurt, Elena knew she needed a plan. Whether it meant leaving Dominic for good or trying to salvage what remained of their relationship, she couldn't endure the limbo. The heartbreak was too great, and the toll on her health too dangerous. Yet, just as she was making her decision, an event loomed on the horizon that none of them could have foreseen, a twist that would expose every raw nerve and force them to confront truths they'd been avoiding for far too long. The tension in the penthouse reached a fever pitch. Dominic began spending more nights out, claiming he was staying at one of the properties under renovation or at a luxury hotel to avoid escalating tensions. Elena knew better. She suspected he was with Sophia. With her due date only a few weeks away, each day felt like a precarious balancing act between her heartbreak and her maternal instincts. Then came the night that changed everything. Elena was dozing fitfully on the sofa when she heard the elevator chime in the foyer. Peeking out, she saw Dominic enter, accompanied by none other than Sophia Laurent herself. Tall, elegant, with dark brown hair cascading around her shoulders, Sophia possessed a magnetic beauty that seemed designed to enthrall. She wore a stylish trench coat and carried a sleek black designer purse. Elena's heart pounded like a war drum. She wanted to confront them both, but shock rooted her to the spot. As if sensing her presence, Sophia turned, their eyes locked. Dominic froze, clearly having hoped to avoid this confrontation. "Elena," he began, his voice cracking, "I didn't expect you to be in the living room." Anger flooded Elena's veins, momentarily overshadowing her shock. "What is she doing here?" she demanded, voice trembling with a mixture of fury and anguish. Sophia cleared her throat, a carefully controlled expression on her face. "I came to, don't speak to me," Elena snapped. She glared at Dominic. "Is this how low you've sunk? Bringing your mistress into our home?" Dominic held up a placating hand. She was upset. "We had an argument. She fainted outside her apartment earlier this evening, and I took her to the ER. I didn't know where else to take her afterward. She's under a lot of stress, too." Elena nearly choked on the bitterness rising in her throat. "She fainted? So that gives you the right to bring her here? Are you out of your mind?" Sophia watched with wide eyes, looking genuinely remorseful. "Elena, I'm sorry this is how you found out about me. I never intended." Elena felt a sudden, sharp pain shoot through her abdomen, cutting off Sophia's words. She clutched her belly, panic surging. "Oh, God," she gasped, doubling over. Dominic rushed to her side, eyes full of concern. "Elena, what's wrong?" She tried to speak, but could only manage anguished whimpers. Another wave of pain coursed through her, and a wet warmth spread down her legs. The realization struck her like lightning. Her water had broken. "Dominic," she managed to croak, "the baby, it's coming." Sophia backed away, horror and guilt etched on her face. Dominic swept Elena into his arms. "We need to get you to the hospital now," he said. His voice trembled with urgency and fear, overshadowing every lie and betrayal that had come before. In that instant, the entire dynamic shifted. Their carefully crafted facade of wealth, power, and composure shattered, replaced by the raw terror of a premature birth and the uncertain fate of the innocent life Elena carried. The drive to Mount Sinai Hospital blurred into a cacophony of honking horns and city lights flashing by. Dominic gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, casting anxious glances at Elena in the back seat every few seconds. Sophia sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her face ashen. Under any other circumstances, Elena would have never allowed Sophia anywhere near her. But there was no time to argue. The baby was coming too soon. Despite the late hour, the emergency room bustled with activity. Dominic practically carried Elena inside, shouting for help. Nurses and orderlies rushed forward with a gurney, whisking Elena down a fluorescent-lit corridor. Dr. Linda Cornell, alerted by Dominic's frantic call, emerged with her surgical team already prepped. "Her contractions are 2 minutes apart," announced a nurse, checking the monitors. "She's only 35 weeks along." Elena's head spun as she clung to Dr. Cornell's hand. "Is this my baby going to be okay?" she stammered, tears escaping down her cheeks. Dr. Cornell's expression was grave, yet reassuring. "We'll do everything we can. We need to stabilize you first. The baby's heartbeat is strong, but the lungs might not be fully developed." Through the haze of pain and worry, Elena saw Dominic hovering at the edges of the chaos, looking uncertain, torn between his devotion to his unborn child and the guilt-laden presence of Sophia. For a moment, her anger at him melted beneath the sheer urgency of the situation. The medical team prepared Elena for an emergency C-section, given the premature rupture of her water and the baby's distress signals. Dominic stepped forward, wanting to be by her side. She hesitated, but in her vulnerable state, she craved support, any support, if it meant reassuring her child's safe arrival. "Stay!" she whispered hoarsely, and Dominic nodded, relief washing over him. But just as Dr. Cornell and the nurses began moving Elena to the operating room, the unexpected happened. Sophia, who had been quietly pacing near the waiting area, suddenly collapsed. Her face went pale and her body crumpled to the floor. The shriek of a nearby nurse echoed against the hospital walls. Dominic's eyes darted between his laboring wife and his fainted mistress. He seemed paralyzed, torn between two irreconcilable halves of his life. Then, to Elena's astonishment, he sprinted towards Sophia, shouting for medical assistance. Anger flared in Elena's chest, intermingling with her excruciating contractions. She couldn't believe he would abandon her at that critical moment. Tears streamed down her face, partly from the physical pain, partly from the crushing sense of betrayal that stabbed her heart anew. "Dominic!" Dr. Cornell's voice was stern. "Your wife needs you in the OR now." He glanced back, torn, but the urgency of Sophia's condition seemed to snap some decision inside him. Instead of following Elena to the operating room, Dominic leaned over Sophia, calling for doctors to examine her. Feeling abandoned, Elena fought the wave of despair rising within her. As orderlies wheeled her into the operating room without Dominic, her vision blurred with tears. She was alone, about to face the most dangerous moment of her life and her babies, while her husband tended to the very woman who had shattered their marriage. Elena blinked back tears as the bright overhead lights in the operating room surrounded her. Nurses spoke in hushed, urgent tones. Dr. Cornell, masked and gowned, leaned over Elena reassuringly. "We're administering anesthesia. Try to stay calm," she said. But Elena's heart hammered in her chest, and her mind remained laser-focused on Dominic's betrayal. Outside, Dominic cradled Sophia's head in his lap while nurses checked her vital signs. "Sophia, can you hear me?" His voice quivered with worry. She remained unconscious, her pulse racing. A nurse waved a blood pressure cuff over her arm, calling out numbers that indicated dangerously low pressure. "Sir, we need to move her to a separate room for evaluation," the nurse insisted. Reluctantly, Dominic allowed them to take Sophia away on a stretcher. His eyes flickered with guilt as he remembered. Elena was moments away from an emergency surgery. Torn, he stepped into the corridor, glancing toward the double doors that led to the OR. By the time he finally made the decision to rush to Elena's side, the doors were shut tight, a "Do Not Enter" sign flashing overhead. A stern nurse blocked his way. "I'm sorry, Mr. Patterson. The C-section has already started. You'll have to wait." Dominic pressed his palms against the doors, feeling the cold metal under his fingertips. His mind whirled with regrets and unspoken apologies. Why did I do this? Why couldn't I be there for her the moment she needed me most? In the operating room, Elena's world narrowed to the steady beeping of the fetal heart monitor and the swirl of medical staff around her. The anesthesia dulled some of her pain, but not the ache of betrayal in her heart. She stared at the ceiling, imagining the future she had once fantasized about, Dominic by her side, holding her hand, comforting her as their baby entered the world. Instead, she faced this moment alone, haunted by the specter of Sophia fainting and Dominic rushing to her aid. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Cornell murmured, "Elena, we're almost there." I see the baby's head. Elena's breath caught in her throat. In a swirl of motion, the baby emerged, a fragile, wriggling boy, letting out a thin, tremulous cry. Relief, love, and fear mingled in Elena's chest as she struggled to lift her head and catch a glimpse. The nurse quickly wrapped the infant in a blanket and whisked him to an incubator station at the corner of the room. "You have a baby boy, Dr. Cornell announced, her eyes crinkling with relief above her surgical mask. "He's a bit small, but we're going to make sure he's well taken care of." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. She felt a sudden rush of maternal protectiveness, a fierce determination that No matter what happened with Dominic, she would do everything in her power for this little life. Outside, Dominic paced the hallway like a trapped animal, anxiety gnawing at him. Every second stretched into an agonizing forever, overshadowed by his guilt over leaving Elena's side. He imagined her tears, her pain, and the knowledge that he had let her down when it mattered most. As the doors finally swung open, Dr. Cornell stepped out, pulling off her surgical mask. Before Dominic could speak, she fixed him with a disapproving glare. "Your wife made it through the surgery. So did your son. But this is not the time for you to bring more stress into Elena's life," she admonished. "She needs rest, and she needs to know she's not alone. Decide which side you're on, Dominic, before it's too late." Harriet Patterson arrived at the hospital in a flurry of hushed footsteps and anxious whispers. A nurse directed her to Elena's recovery room, where she found her daughter-in-law lying pale and exhausted, and the fourth drip attached to her arm. The newborn was in the neonatal intensive care unit, receiving specialized care for his premature lungs. Harriet's normally poised demeanor cracked at the sight of Elena's frailty. She gently took the younger woman's hand and squeezed. "Elena, my dear," she said softly, "I've come as soon as I heard. How are you feeling?" Elena's eyes fluttered open, hollow from pain and betrayal. "I'm alive," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The baby, he's in NICU. Harriet's eyes flickered with concern. "Dr. Cornell told me he's receiving the best possible care. They're optimistic he'll pull through just fine." Relief seeped into Elena's tired expression, but her gaze soon shifted with lingering sorrow. "I don't want Dominic near me," she blurted, tears collecting at the corners of her eyes. "He left me alone when I needed him the most." A flicker of disappointment crossed Harriet's face. "I know," she murmured. "I confronted him outside. He's torn up about what happened, but that doesn't excuse his behavior. All I can do is apologize on his behalf and tell you that you have my unwavering support." For once, Elena believed Harriet's sincerity. The older woman gently patted Elena's hand again. "Whatever decision you make going forward about Dominic, about your marriage, I will stand by you and my grandchild." Just then, Dominic appeared at the doorway. Harriet turned toward her son, her expression cool and guarded. "Should I give you two a moment?" Harriet asked, glancing at Elena. Elena hesitated, then nodded. Harriet squeezed her hand one last time and stepped into the corridor. Dominic approached the bedside, guilt and love warring in his eyes. He spoke in a shaky voice. "Elena, I don't know how to express how sorry I am. I made the worst mistake of my life. I never meant to hurt you." Elena studied his face, her anger still simmering beneath her exhaustion. "You left me in the moment our baby was coming into the world. For her." His shoulders sagged as if a crushing weight pressed down on him. "Sophia fainted. I panicked. You chose her," Elena interrupted, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Admit it." He looked down, tears threatening. "In that moment, yes. I know that's unforgivable, but I want to make it right." Elena let out a tearful laugh that sounded more like a sob. "You've been cheating on me for months. You think one apology is going to undo everything?" Dominic shook his head vehemently. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll cut ties with Sophia, I swear it. I know I can't change what happened, but I don't want to lose you or our son." Elena closed her eyes, tears rolling onto the pillow. She felt torn between the love she once cherished for Dominic and the unbearable pain of his betrayal. "I need time," she whispered, "and right now, my focus is on our child." "If you really care about us, prove it." Dominic nodded, tears spilling over. "I will," he whispered. For a long moment, they remained in silence. The sterile smell of disinfectant and the distant beep of hospital machinery, their only companions. Outside, Harriet leaned against the wall, eyes closed in silent prayer. She hoped that her grandchild would have a united family to return home to, but given the depth of Dominic's betrayal, she couldn't be sure a happy ending was still possible. 3 days later, Elena was discharged from the hospital, though their son remained in NICU. The doctors insisted on careful monitoring until his breathing stabilized. Weary from sleepless nights and emotional upheaval, Elena returned to the penthouse with Harriet, while Dominic stayed behind at the hospital to handle paperwork and check on the baby. The penthouse felt eerily silent, its once luxurious comforts overshadowed by the tension that had taken root in every corner. Harriet helped Elena settle into her bedroom, fluffing pillows and drawing the curtains to let in the soft afternoon light. Not an hour had passed before a call came in from the hospital. Harriet answered, her face going pale as she listened. "Yes, I understand. We'll be there right away." She hung up, turning to Elena with trembling hands. "It's Dominic," Harriet managed. "He's collapsed at the hospital." Despite her anger, Elena felt a jolt of alarm course through her. "Collapsed? Is he okay?" Harriet shook her head, already gathering her coat. "They said it might be exhaustion, or stress, or both. I'm not sure. He was found unconscious in the NICU waiting area." A swirl of conflicting emotions tore at Elena. She still harbored resentment, yet the idea of Dominic lying helpless in a hospital bed filled her with dread. "Let's go," she whispered. By the time they arrived at the hospital, they found Dominic in a curtained-off area of the emergency ward, and the fourth drip snaked from his arm, and a nurse was checking his vitals. His eyes were half open, the usual spark of confidence replaced by utter vulnerability. Elena approached slowly, Harriet trailing behind. "Dominic," she said, her voice taut with concern. "What happened?" He swallowed, struggling to speak. "I was with our son. I hadn't slept in days, just pacing around, worried about him, worried about you. I guess I pushed my body too far." Elena felt her throat tighten. Despite everything, she couldn't ignore the fact that Dominic cared about their baby. That was undeniable, at least. "Are you going to be all right?" she asked, voice softening. The doctor, a tall man named Dr. Michael Stevens, stepped into the curtained area. "Mr. Patterson experienced acute exhaustion and dehydration. He'll recover with rest and proper care, but he needs to reduce stress levels and maintain a healthier routine, especially in these critical weeks for your newborn." Harriet glanced pointedly at Elena, as if urging her to offer some measure of comfort. Yet Elena stood frozen, torn between compassion and lingering betrayal. Just as she was about to step closer, a flurry of movement caught her attention. Sophia Laurent arrived, looking frantic and disheveled. She rushed to Dominic's side, ignoring the stunned expressions of Elena and Harriet. "Dominic, my God, are you okay?" Elena's heart sank. Even now, she clenched her fists, bitterness rising anew. Harriet cleared her throat sharply. "Miss Laurent, this is neither the time nor the place for you to be here," she snapped, uncharacteristically rude. Sophia straightened, her expression a mix of guilt and indignation. "I have every right to be concerned." "Dominic and I," Elena's patience finally snapped. "Get out," she hissed, tears pricking her eyes. "I don't care what you think your rights are. This is my husband, my child's father, and you're the reason we're in this mess to begin with." Sophia opened her mouth to retort, but Dominic raised a trembling hand. "Stop," he managed weakly. "Sophia, please just go." Looking wounded, Sophia hesitated, then turned and hurried away. The tension in the small space was suffocating. Harriet placed a comforting hand on Elena's shoulder, while Dominic lay there, eyes closed. The weight of his choices and the precarious state of his marriage pressing down on him like a lead blanket. Days bled into a week after Dominic's collapse at the hospital. Although his condition wasn't life-threatening, the doctors insisted on keeping him for observation. Harriet took charge of coordinating everything from Dominic's medical paperwork to overseeing the day-to-day business inquiries flooding Patterson and Company. Elena, still raw from the betrayal and overwhelmed by her own recent hospitalization, found herself juggling an onslaught of emotions. Her life revolved around two pressing concerns: Dominic's fragile health and their premature baby's slow recovery in the neonatal intensive care unit. Despite the tension that lingered like a heavy fog between her and Dominic, Elena couldn't help feeling a swell of concern for him. She remembered how unstoppable he used to seem, tall, confident, commanding every room he entered. Now he lay in a hospital bed, hooked up to IVs, his complexion ashen. Dr. Michael Stevens, the physician overseeing Dominic's recovery, emphasized that severe exhaustion and dehydration had worn his body down. Emotional stress, Dr. Stevens explained, could be as damaging as physical ailments. Elena knew all too well about emotional stress. Every morning, she left the penthouse early to visit Daniel in the NICU, mindful of the strict visiting hours. The hush of that sterile ward, punctuated by the soft beeping of monitors and the steady hum of ventilators, both comforted and frightened her. She would carefully cradle Daniel against her chest, performing skin-to-skin contact, feeling the fragile warmth of his body. He was tiny, so heartbreakingly small, but each day his lungs grew a bit stronger. Each day his nurses expressed cautious optimism that he would soon breathe on his own without mechanical assistance. Meanwhile, Harriet set up a makeshift command center in the hospital lobby. She fielded phone calls from the Patterson and Company board members who were anxious about Dominic's absence and the future of the Westchester development. She updated them with carefully curated statements. Dominic is taking a brief medical leave. The project remains on track. Behind closed doors, however, Harriet's composed mask faltered. She admitted to Elena that she'd never seen her son this vulnerable. For the first time, Harriet seemed to truly empathize with Elena's predicament, recognizing that her precious grandchild's future and the fragile state of the Patterson family legacy hinged on more than just business deals and public image. One afternoon, while Elena stood outside Dominic's hospital room, Harriet approached, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You should go in," Harriet urged quietly. "He's asking for you." Elena peered through the half-open door. Dominic, propped up on pillows, looked haunted. The fourth drip snaked into his arm, and dark circles rimmed his hazel eyes. With a deep breath, Elena stepped inside. She wasn't sure what she'd say. Anger still simmered beneath her concern, a low heat she couldn't extinguish. Yet when Dominic looked up at her, his gaze brimming with regret, something inside her softened, if only slightly. "Thank you for coming," he murmured. Even his voice sounded weaker than usual. Elena stood near the foot of the bed, arms crossed in a half-defensive posture. "How are you feeling?" she asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. He attempted a smile that fell short of convincing. "Better, physically. Dr. Stevens says I can probably go home in a few days, as long as I promise not to overwork myself." An awkward silence followed. For a moment, Elena's mind flitted to the time she had waited at home, alone and pregnant, while Dominic claimed to be at business meetings when he was likely with Sophia. Resentment flared, but she forced herself to remember that each day Daniel fought for his life, and each day Dominic had shown genuine concern for their son. "You've been visiting Daniel in the NICU?" she asked. He nodded. "Whenever the nurses let me. I can't believe how tiny he is." A hint of a tremor threaded through his voice. "He's fighting so hard." Elena settled into the chair by his bedside. "He's a fighter, all right." She paused, swallowing back tears. I don't want him to grow up in a broken home, Dominic. But I also can't just pretend nothing happened. He stared at her with a sober intensity, guilt etched in every line of his face. I know, I don't expect forgiveness overnight, but I'll do anything. I've already instructed my lawyer, Garrett Morgan, to draft a statement affirming that my relationship with Sophia is over no financial ties, no ongoing contracts, nothing. She was quiet for a long time, her eyes drifting to the fourth pump. Finally, she whispered, I don't care about your statements or your lawyers. I just want honesty. If we have any chance, you have to be transparent about everything your business, your whereabouts, your feelings. Dominic bowed his head. I owe you that and more. True to his word, within days of being discharged, Dominic sought professional help. He and Elena booked an appointment with Dr. Rebecca Hayes, a marital therapist known for working discreetly with high-profile couples. Harriet, relieved that her son was finally taking responsibility, offered to babysit Daniel once he came home from the hospital so that Elena and Dominic could attend therapy sessions uninterrupted. That initial session was deeply uncomfortable for both of them, sitting face to face on a plush sofa under the gentle scrutiny of Dr. Hayes forced them to articulate the insecurities and resentments they'd long buried. Dominic admitted he'd felt overwhelmed by the expectations of carrying on Patterson and Company, terrified of disappointing the memory of his late father. Elena confessed that she often felt inferior in the Patterson family's high society world, convinced Dominic might eventually abandon her for someone more glamorous, a fear that turned prophetic when Sophia entered the picture. By the end of the session, both felt emotionally raw, yet oddly hopeful. There was still a mountain of pain to navigate, but they had taken the first step together. And that night, as Elena returned to the penthouse, she discovered Harriet waiting with Daniel in the living room. Seeing her mother-in-law cradling the baby in her arms, wearing an almost maternal expression, made Elena realize she wasn't alone in this struggle. An entire family's well-being hung in the balance, and even Harriet, so poised and proud, was fighting for a future where Daniel could grow up in a household united by love rather than torn by secrets. Gradually, life settled into a new rhythm. Dominic, though still dealing with the repercussions of his betrayal, was determined to share parenting duties. He helped Elena at all hours warming bottles, soothing Daniel during late-night crying spells, and learning the intricacies of neonatal care. Elena, while not yet ready to trust him fully, saw glimmers of the man she once fell in love with. The man who could be gentle, attentive, and protective when not consumed by ambition or secrecy. Sophia's presence receded like a distant nightmare. According to Dominic, she had left New York entirely, apparently unwilling to remain a footnote in his life. For Elena, Sophia's departure meant one less source of stress, but the ghost of betrayal still haunted her. Slowly, though, there were moments of warmth and tentative reconnection. When Daniel began to gain weight steadily and no longer needed his incubator, Dominic and Elena shared a tearful embrace in the NICU. Holding their son without tubes and monitors felt like a small miracle. It was in those hushed, almost sacred instances when Daniel's tiny fingers curled around Dominic's thumb and Elena's breath caught in awe that they both realized how close they had come to losing everything. Healing wounds was a slow, unpredictable process. A single argument or reminder of the past could reopen raw emotions. But each counseling session, each night spent caring for Daniel side by side, and each gesture of remorse from Dominic incrementally repaired the damaged foundation of their relationship. While Elena couldn't say she had truly forgiven him, she began to imagine a future where forgiveness wasn't an impossibility. where Daniel could grow up with two loving parents and where the Patterson name might stand for something more than a luxurious facade and whispered scandals. The path was long, the outcome uncertain, but for now, hope flickered a fragile light guiding them out of the darkness. And as Dominic gently rocked Daniel to sleep in the hospital's quiet NICU ward one night, Elena watched from the doorway. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe they might not just survive this ordeal, but emerge stronger, welded together by a love that had been tested, tarnished, yet refused to fade away. Spring arrived, painting Manhattan in soft pink blossoms and fresh possibilities. 6 weeks had passed since Daniel's premature birth, and the Patterson penthouse, once a place of tension, now brimmed with the sweet melody of a newborn's coos. Each sunrise brought new routines, bottle feedings, diaper changes, lullabies at odd hours, fusing Dominic and Elena in a shared endeavor, nurturing their fragile son. Therapy sessions with Dr. Hayes exposed layers of unresolved pain and guilt. Dominic's confession about feeling suffocated by high expectations, both familial and societal, helped Elena comprehend the internal turmoil that had contributed to his affair. It didn't absolve him, but it provided context. Meanwhile, Elena explored her own fears of inadequacy, how she had worried she wasn't good enough for the Patterson legacy, how she had suppressed her doubts for the sake of perceived harmony. Amid tears and breakthroughs, they learned a new language of honesty. Dominic acknowledged that his choice to rush to Sophia's side in the hospital was the greatest regret of his life, a moment of panic he would forever wish to redo. Elena, for her part, tried to see beyond the immediate hurt to determine if genuine remorse and change existed. Harriet also participated in some sessions, voicing her deep disappointment in Dominic's actions, yet expressing unwavering love for her family. At home, Elena watched Dominic hold Daniel, gently rocking him to sleep in the nursery. The tenderness in Dominic's eyes was no performance. It was raw, real. In that quiet moment, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of redemption. A few days later, she received a letter addressed to Elena Patterson with no return address. Inside was a note from Sophia Laurent, short and contrite. "I'm leaving New York for good. I'm sorry." Trembling, Elena folded the note. She felt relief, but also a strange sadness, a final reminder of how close she had come to losing everything. She told Dominic about the letter. He listened quietly, then reached for her hand. "That chapter of my life is over," he said, pressing her palm against his heart. "This is where I belong, with you, with Daniel." Eventually, the day arrived when Elena took Daniel for a walk in Central Park, Dominic's hand firmly clasped in hers. The baby's eyes opened wide at the gentle sunlight filtering through the new leaves. Elena and Dominic strolled along a path lined with tulips, pausing to sit on a wooden bench where families laughed and couples shared ice cream cones. There, in that simple moment, they realized the magnitude of what they had endured. Yes, scars remained. Yes, the memory of betrayal still lingered like a shadow at the edge of their happiness. But with Daniel gurgling contentedly in his stroller, they understood that new life represented not just the birth of their son, but also the potential for a rebirth of their marriage. That night, as the sunset painted the penthouse windows in hues of gold, Elena gently placed Daniel in his crib. Dominic stood behind her, arms encircling her waist. She leaned back into him, eyes closed, remembering every twist and turn that had led to this fragile peace. "I can't promise I'll forget," she whispered, "but I'm learning to forgive." Dominic pressed his lips to her temple. "I'll never stop working to deserve that forgiveness." In the hush of that evening, with Daniel breathing softly and the city lights glowing beyond the glass, they found a glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, a fractured love could heal and a broken family could become whole again. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of shattered trust, heartbreak, and the eventual struggle toward redemption. If you've been moved by Elena and Dominic's story, by the pain they endured and the hard-fought hope they reclaimed, consider showing your support. Like this video to help more people discover this story of resilience. Share it with friends who need a reminder that even in our darkest hours, healing is possible. And remember to subscribe to this channel if you'd love more real-life drama fiction that delves into the raw, unpredictable realities of human relationships. Your engagement helps us create more immersive, heartfelt stories that reflect life's complexities and the power of second chances. Stay tuned, and let's continue exploring the depths of love, betrayal, and forgiveness together.